So, my name is Freddy Christensen, as just announced. I'm going to talk about multi-tenancy and how it changes the NAV developer experience. Actually, this title was given to me, and it doesn't change the developer experience that much. I'm not going to drive a lot into detail about AL coding and stuff like that. I'm going to touch upon the couple of areas where it affects developing code. Else, I'm going to talk about multi-tenancy in general, who it's for, what it is, and how to set it up, and how to run it, and all of these things. And the reason for standing over here right now is that there's so much light over there, so it's just hard to see anything. And if I'm standing over here, I can actually see if you guys raise your hand when I ask a couple of questions. First one, who participated in the keynote yesterday morning? That is, I think, the vast majority, and that's fine, because I'm not going to repeat what Thomas told you guys about yesterday in the keynote, so I'm not going to go through the same slides. That would be a waste of time. Who signed up for a My NAV TechDays tenant.navdemo.net? Only a few. That was what I was expecting, because I could see that 69 people signed up for a tenant. The website and the tenant and the service was announced yesterday at the keynote, and you guys got an email where you can go in and actually sign up, and you'd get an email back from the system, and it would give you access to a tenant. I'm going to go through in this session how to create a multi-tenant service on Azure and how that setup actually was made. I kind of prepared that service to be able to handle 500-600 users and 69. So it seems like I overdid it a bit. Before starting here, how many people think they have an immediate need for multi-tenancy? Okay, quite a few. I'm going to ask the same question when I'm done here. Not that I think that you're wrong, but just to make sure that I kind of cover everything, because multi-tenancy is not for everybody, I think, and I'm gonna start on that. So, with that, let me take the very first slide, which just touches upon what I'm going to talk about. What is multi-tenancy, and who is it for? What does a solution like that look like, and how does it look from the customer? And then considerations to take when you're creating a multi-tenant service or solution, and then changes to the way that the developer works and what he has to do in the app. First of all, so multi-tenancy is optional. I think that was expressed very well in the keynote yesterday morning. It is still capable of running single tenancy. Actually, when you install the demo, you're installing it in single tenancy mode, and you have to do something specifically to run multi-tenancy. We have no plans of changing the fact that we still support single tenancy. Multi-tenancy is not intended to be used by the traditional NAV installations that we have out there today, whether they are hosted or on-premise. Majority of those installations have customizations, add-ons, all of these things. And multi-tenancy, as you probably understood from Thomas's description yesterday, is all about having one app and a lot of customers running the same app. It is targeted at giving partners the opportunity to pursue new and repeatable business in the cloud. Well, you can use multi-tenancy on-prem, you can use multi-tenancy for other purposes than this. You could use multi-tenancy to have a test setup of your app with a special database instead of having a test company, and you can use multi-tenancy for a lot of things, but it was intended for this purpose. And wherever we had to target something or to have some trade-offs, this is what we thought about. A lot of customers running the same app. So, if we look at this slide, tells us about probably a list of how things have evolved in NAV. The single instance way here, where you have one user connecting to, or a number of users connecting to one NST on a single box, connecting to a database. That is kind of what we did in 2009 and 2009 SP1. Multi-company, we've been able to do that for a while as well. And of course, multi-instance as well. You can install multiple NSTs on the same box. But as Thomas showed you yesterday morning, it only scales to a certain point. You can only install so many NSTs on a box. And if you have a lot of users for these NSTs, then you'll run into a situation where maybe you've installed 8 NSTs on one box, and you'll figure out that one of these customers now have more users, and you actually cannot fit these 8 NSTs on one box anymore. You have to split them up, and there are a number of issues in doing that. Multi-company is actually the one that gets closest to multi-tenancy. But multi-company is, as you know, just another set of tables in the same database. So if you have 10 companies, you just have 10 times X number of tables in one database, and you actually don't have any separation of data here. So isolation of data was the point that I was making. Multi-tenancy, you have every customer gets a tenant, and the users that are connecting to that tenant will be unable to see data from the other tenants. In fact, tenant data are put in separate databases, and your AL code cannot connect to a different to the database of a different tenant. So you have the isolation, and you have a way of making sure that you utilize your resources to the max if you're running multi-tenancy. We have done some tests on a number of users on multi-tenant servers, but of course these tests are a imaginative scenario, like users creating customers and orders and stuff like that, and then trying to scale out to figure out, so how many users can you actually run on one server of a certain size that runs a number of tenants. And some of the questions that we've been asked is, how many tenants can you have on one computer or on one server? And I always answer that that is the wrong question to ask. And if you ask how many users can you have on one tenant, that's also the wrong question to ask. What it's all about is how many simultaneous users can one server run, right? If you have 100 simultaneous users, you might be able to do with one server. If you have more than that, you have to scale out to multiple servers, and I'm going to show you in this session how to do that. If you're running only on one server, no, I'm not going to go there now. I'm going to take that later. The multi-instance, I think this picture shows very well that if you have a number of separate legal entities and you want those guys to run on the same app, multi-tenancy is the way to go. If you only have 5 customers, it's probably not worth the effort. If you have 10, it might be worth the effort. If you have 100, it's definitely worth the effort. If you have 1,000 or 10,000, well, it speaks for itself. So, from the technical side and from the customer side, how does a multi-tenant solution look? How many people have visited other sessions about multi-tenancy, either the workshops or I think there were other sessions as well about multi-tenancy? Okay, a couple, that's fine. These sessions have probably shown you how to deploy a single server, and on that single server create a multi-tenancy or set up multi-tenancy. And this is the picture how to do that, or not to do that, but how to see that. So you have a number of customers connecting into a port on your machine, and that port will just reply whatever or give you the answers that you're looking for, or service you as a customer, right? But a couple of issues in a setup like this. So what if the server crashes and is unable to start? Well, then we have to call all our customers that are running on that box and say, well, we will be up again in a number of hours, and then set up a new computer if we don't have one that can do the same thing. What if you get more customers that you can fit on a single box? Now you've given out URLs to all of these guys, they're connecting to this server, and you figure out that, oops, some of my customers now have more users, and I need to move around on these tenants, and I need to set up another server. What about scalability? You actually probably have more customers during daytime, Monday to Friday, than during nighttime and during the weekends. Wouldn't it be nice if you had like 10,000 customers? That's a good. Wouldn't it be nice to have 10,000 customers? If you had a lot of customers, wouldn't it be nice that you could pay for only the machine power that you need in the peak hours, and then scale down to just be able to support the users that are still awake during nighttime? And what if Azure is doing scheduled maintenance? Now and then I get an email from Azure stating that between 8 p.m. and 2 p.m. Tomorrow night, your machines might be restarted, and for some period of time. And that's fine if you have set up load balancing and multiple computers and stuff like that, but if you only have one server serving your customers, you might be down for an hour or two when that mail pops up. That's Azure, of course. Absolutely not sure that if you selected other hosters that they do the same, but sometimes you have to tear down your hardware in order to do maintenance, and if you only run on one box, chances are you're going to be down for some time. So load balance multi-tenancy is a picture like this. You have two servers, and you have three customers here connecting into a port, and it's load balanced between the two servers. This means that whenever Azure does scheduled maintenance, it's only going to tear down one computer at a time, and your customers will still be able to be serviced by your serviceware. If your customers have a connection, if they're working at the time where the server is restarted, then they will lose their connection, of course, because there's state on the server and you have a connection and all of these things. But they can restart immediately and then be rerouted to the other computer, and they can keep on working. They're not going to lose any valuable things, because, as you know, NAV saves like during most of what you're doing. The most that you can lose is kind of the line that you're typing in right now in an order, or the current page that you're working on. So, for load balancing, what we need there is, instead of looking at the NAV service tier as a server with NAV installed on it, we need to look at NAV as a cloud service. So it's not one server with NAV on it, it's multiple service tiers in a service. All service tiers mounts all tenants, meaning that any service tier can handle any request from any customer. You can increase capacity of your service just by adding another server if you want to. You can save money by shutting down some of the servers, and you can give out URLs to customers that won't change because you move servers or add servers or stuff like that. This is the concept that you should be following if you are thinking large-scale multi-tenancy setups. This is another picture of a multi-tenant solution. This is actually pretty close to the one that lies behind the NAV TechDays tenant demo. In that one, I actually set up 4 servers instead of 3, because I thought 500 users, that might be more than what 3 servers could handle. But I'm pretty sure that with the 69 users, I could have done with a small instance instead. Below, on the bottom here, there's 2 dev boxes. I'm going to talk about why and why they were put in there, and we're going to show how to use those. As you can see, there's a number of ports that are load balanced, and I'm going to talk about that in a second here. Load balancing between servers here. This is Azure specific, the top one here. The Azure load balancer is what's called a round-robin load balancer, and it's what's called 4-tuple based. 4-tuple means that whenever an application connects to a service somewhere, there's a source IP address, there's a destination IP address. That's 2 of the tuples. Then there's a source port and a destination port. Whenever these four tuples are the same, you're going to get the same machine behind the load balancer. So whenever you connect to your service that has 4 computers behind it, and you connect from the same machine using the same ports, you're going to get the same machine. Meaning that the role-teller client is actually working just fine because it sends keep alives every 2 minutes. I forgot to talk about the timeout. These 4 tuples are only remembered for 4 minutes. Meaning that if you don't connect until 5 minutes after, then the load balancer would have forgotten which server you got last time, and it's going to give you a new one. The Windows client, there's a setting in the config file there called client services keep alive interval, set to 2 minutes, meaning that it's going to send keep alives every 2 minutes, and it's going to keep the same server behind the load balancer. Web client is also stateful, and that's a problem because Internet Explorer is always, when you connect to a port somewhere, it is creating random source ports. So the 4 tuples are never going to be the same, and you're going to get a different server on the other side of the load balancer every single time you send a request to the server. The way we handle this in the service that you're going to see here is that the actual web client port that NAV services is not load balanced, but it's on a different port. And then the actual 443 or the actual HTTPS port that you connect to when you type in your URL, that is load balanced, and the first thing that happens on the computer that you get is that it redirects you to a port on that computer which is not load balanced. So then you get a pointer to a specific computer, kind of like what the Windows client is doing, just by changing the URL inside the browser. Web services, click once, and help server, and all of these guys are stateless, so there are no problems. If you have an application that wants to connect to web services and you think that you can get some advantage of getting the same server because of caching and stuff like that, then you can also send keep alives like the Windows client is doing. And of course, when you send keep alives, if that server that you got last time in the meantime has been restarted, then you will get a new one, but if it's still there, you'll get the same. Okay, so let's have a look at the NAV TechDays cloud service and look at the Azure Management Portal here. So I have a number of services. So this is cloud services, this is virtual machines, and a lot of other things. I'll have a cloud service here called NAV TechDays. Inside of that cloud service, there's a number of computers. Let's see, we can scroll up here. There's a number of what's called instances. Instances are the actual computers that are running inside the cloud service. So one cloud service can contain a lot. I actually don't know if there's a limitation to how many VMs you can combine in one cloud service. In this case, I've set up 4 servers that are called NAV TechDays 1 to 4, and one called TechDays Dev, which is my development box. These guys are X-large, meaning that they are actually the same as a physical box. I think they are very, very big. Let me drill into one of these guys, and actually now I've drilled in and looked at one of the actual VMs. I can see the dashboard for this one. As you can see in a second, it's not like it has been overburdened by anything. It's at a very, very low percentage, like 0.5% utilization. So it could do more, definitely. Let's look at the configuration. The availability set here is what determines the load balancing. The machines that you have put in one availability set, there you can specify which endpoints you want to have load balanced and what not. So look into the endpoints, you'll be able to see which ports we have publicly available, meaning on the outside of the cloud service, and then the private port, which is actually the port that is connected to on the server. And whenever it says load balanced out here, you have a name on the load balanced set, and you can see that click once, yes, that's load balanced, client is load balanced, help server is, OData is, SOAP is, and web client is. But as I said, web client, that is actually just a redirector, and this guy is the actual port that is listened to by NAV in this setup. The availability set determines one other thing, and that is when you set up 4 computers in an availability set and look at the instances here, Azure will spread those out over 4 different update domains and 2 different fault domains. Update domains means that whenever Azure does updates to these computers, it's going to take everybody in update domain 0 first, and whenever those guys are up running again, it's going to take 1 and then 2 and then 3, meaning that at any given time with scheduled maintenance here, we'll always have 3 servers running and with the ability to actually serve our customers. The fault domain is different. That's the actual hardware. That's the actual physical container, meaning that we'll have 2 machines here in one container and 2 other computers in a different container. Meaning that if an entire container or set of hardware blows up, we'll still have 2 servers that are capable of hosting our service to our customers. And this is as close as we'll get to high availability as we can get. If you look at this machine, the TechDays dev machine here, and look at the dashboard for that one, instances. So this one is going to tell me that the availability set for this virtual machine has only 1 running instance, which affects the service level agreement, meaning that Azure doesn't actually, if you only have 1 computer running, they cannot guarantee that this service will be up all the time, or the SLA definitely decreases, right? Yeah. I'll get back to actually how to connect to this one, and you'll be able to see all the load balance ports and stuff like that a second after. So here we are. The way that this was set up was, of course, not by manual installation. I didn't set up 4 computers and then insert the DVD and install and do a lot of manual things and create a tenant config with 750 tenants by hand. I created a number of scripts for doing this. And these scripts will be published on partner source or customer source, probably both, or on blogs, on how to do this. But it's not a secret. It's not, the script actually just automates things, and the scripts are using the existing cloud scripts that are on the DVD to perform all the things that it does. But it's just a nice way of getting these things automated. And I'm actually going to show you these scripts on the computer that is running here. So what I created was a way of defining a configuration. So this, maybe I should ask how many people actually know, and I'll go over here so that I can see the response. How many people actually know PowerShell? It's around a third, I think so. Okay. Well, as Thomas said yesterday, PowerShell is, or I normally say, I don't think Thomas said that, PowerShell is kind of batch file on steroids, I think. So it is a script where you can run commands and all these things, but it's way more powerful than batch files, because every command doesn't just have an output to the screen, it actually returns an object, and that object can actually be passed on to other scripts and stuff like that. So it's more like a programming language than it's a bat file. And you can do all kinds of things. And you can actually write .NET code more or less directly inside of, or you can use .NET objects directly in PowerShell. That's probably the better way to put it. What you see here is a property bag. We'll create a new object of a set of properties, and these guys are just variables then. So what is the location of your service? I want it to be placed in the Western US. This is another variable that just is a property bag that tells us, so if your service is in the Western US, what is your SQL server and what is blah, 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 what are the affinity groups, what is the virtual network, and all of these things are hidden in that one. The other information here just specifies the name of the service, how many servers do you want, how many dev boxes, what are the size of the VMs, what are the names, certificates, and all of these things captured in one script here, which is kind of my definition of my service. With that definition, I have a script called new nav service, which just take one parameter, which is nav service. That is my configuration. Running this script will create a service. And running this script with my TechDays definition of a service has created those 4 servers, 1 dev box, and I was ready to add tenants afterwards. Going through this script is actually fairly easy to read. I'm going to skip some of the lines, but in the beginning up here, we'll create the affinity group. That is where we want all our machines to be. We'll create a new Azure service, which is the one that's going to host all our servers, and then create the app database. This is actually one of the commands from the existing cloud script. Then we're going to add the first server. That is one of the new scripts, specifying the configuration, and then say this is the first one, and then add additional servers just by looping over the number of servers that we want to add. At this time, we have a running service with all the servers, and I can add a number of default tenants, and then I can add the dev boxes afterwards, and this is the end of the script. I said new nav service database is the existing one. It's not. This is one that actually is in this pack of scripts, and it's going to take the parameters from the service configuration and transfer those to the original script. So it's not entirely correct. And the new nav service tenant is also a kind of a thing on top of the normal mount nav tenant. And the reason for that is that we want to, when we add a service tenant, we want to restore a database and mount the tenant on all the computers that we have. The way that I then added the 750 tenants is with this script, where actually the top half is just to get a random password. And then the bottom half is a loop. Whenever you do this 1 to something, you pipe a number of things from a virtual list into a set of scripts. So you'll have for next loop here for 1 to 750. Then get a random password and set up an object specifying what is the name of my tenant and what is the password for that one and what is the user, and then call a new nav service tenant. And it took some time. It takes a couple of minutes or maybe 2 minutes to create a tenant. And since I was expecting 500 people signing up, I thought I would prepare those tenants up front, and actually did make 750 tenants, which I then just give out using the website that you all got a link for. So, drilling into the scripts, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. The scripts are currently not anywhere. I'm going to go through those with the dev team so that I can upload them to, as I said, customer source and partner source, and then they're going to be available as sample scripts on how to deploy a nav service in the cloud. Let's have a look very shortly on actually what came out of this, which is this one. This is the one that Thomas showed you yesterday, where we actually have all the tenants loaded on this service tier. And if I start to dismount them here, of course, this server will not be able to respond to that tenant anymore. So I'm not going to do that. Okay. So multi-tenancy from a customer's point of view, right? If you have a multi-tenant solution, it could be whatever. I mean, you could imagine that you create a solution for a vertical market, and that solution is created in the right way. You don't have any customizations for the customers, or no customer-specific customizations. You've created your reports in a configurable way, and you've done everything that is ready to create this app up there. And now you want to allow people maybe to sign up themselves and create a tenant and do click, try, buy, or whatever on your app. Then you need to provision tenants to your customers. And the customers will have to get a URL in which they connect to your service. And I'm going to go through how the tenant resolution, how does NAV figure out what tenant to actually give you when you try to connect and actually do stuff, right? No customizations, meaning that, as I said before, same app for all customers. You can do personalizations, you cannot do configurations for customer specific. And reports, well, you cannot do customer specific reports in 2013 R2, which is probably one of the things that we would have liked to not do, and we're looking at that for Creed. So I'm also going to touch upon how customers will experience an upgrade. Like if you're using Office 365 and Office 365 is upgrading from one version to the other, how is that experienced? Almost nothing. Or you experience almost nothing. You'll see that suddenly some things changes, but you actually do not experience any downtime, and you don't experience any like, oh, now you need to go to this URL in order to go to your Office 365 tenant because we changed something. And I think that's important if you create a solution in the cloud that a lot of customers need to use. They need to get a URL which they can take and use for the duration of they use this service. Let's have a look at the site that we send out. It's on this one. This one you can enter your email. We'll do that. freddyk@microsoft.com. And press Get My Tenant. What it's going to do now is not actually do a deployment of a tenant. It's just going to look in a database to see, did this guy already get a tenant? Yes, then I'm just going to send the same email to him once again. And I already have that email here. I'm going to receive the same email in a second, where there is information about how to access my tenant via the web client, via the Windows client, via OData services, and via SOAP services. This could be your multi-tenant solution in the cloud, and the other page here could be your sign-up page, right? It's very simple. Just type in an email and you get your URL. That's probably not the way to do it. You probably want more information than just an email address in order to send out something that customers can use. But I think for the purpose of the demo, it kind of makes the point. The email you get was just created from the website as well and has 4 links. If I click Access to Web Client, it's going to take me directly to the web client, and I changed the password from the one that was in the email, so you guys cannot connect to my tenant. But I can. Now I'm in, and I have my company here, and I can of course run with the web client as I want, and use the web client as normal. And as I said, there are 750 tenants in here, and of course we have data separation, so if I change any of my data here, it's not going to affect anybody else. Another thing from the email, if I want to install the Windows client, I'm going to be redirected to the Click Once installation page. Click Install Now. I already did this, so it's just going to start the client that I already have installed. Let's say connect to that one. I can run the Roleseller client towards the same service in the cloud as well. One thing that you will see when running the Roleseller client is that the Select Server dialog is gone, a click once manifest is specialized to connect to a specific tenant or and a specific server, so you should not change servers in a click once manifest. And you can easily have multiple click once installation on the same computer. So I could easily have 3 different icons connecting to 3 different tenants if I wanted to do that. I can also run the installed client, and I ran that earlier on. This one. So I installed the client on this computer as well, side by side with the click once one. And that is not part of the email, by the way. But you can connect to this one as well, and if I do select server in this one, you're going to see NAV TechDays, blah, 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 and then tenant is TechDays 2 here. The other 2 links is accessing OData services. A couple of things were exposed as services like customer card, sales order card, and company. And the last one is accessing SOAP services, and you can see what's exposed as web services here. And if you want to try out, you can also write an app that connects to this. I'm not going to do that in this session. Back to the presentation. So try it out. I think the website says I'm going to tear them down again on the 15th of November. I might leave them up there for another week or 2. But it's something that you can try it out, and you'll get a click once manifest or a website. It's really not, it's for free. You don't have to put in your credit card. I don't have to know anything, and I'm not going to misuse your email for anything, but to send you information about now I'm tearing this tenants down again because the demo site will be destroyed. And this website is only going to be there until tomorrow or something like that. So if you haven't signed up until tomorrow, the website is going to be gone again. Provisioning tenants. My website did the second option here, just send out emails with pre-provisioned tenants. If you want to do tenants provisioning on demand, you need to create a database or restore a database. It depends on whether you have demo data that you want to have in this tenant that you give out. If you just create an empty database, Thomas showed you that yesterday in the keynote, creating an empty database, creating company, mounting the tenant would actually create all of the tenant tables there, but of course empty. The other option is restoring a database and then mounting that as a tenant database. And that's what I've done for the 750 tenants here. I've restored the W1 database, so you all have demo data in that one. Also, creating a click once manifest if you need to. It's optional whether you want to use click once or not. I selected to go with both options. If you don't want to, then you can use web client, and then you don't have to run that part of the script. You need to mount the tenant on all servers. If you only mount the tenant on 2 servers, then chances are that customer is going to hit one of the other 2 servers and will be denied and actually get a notification that you are connecting to an unknown tenant. And then, of course, sending out the email with the information on how to connect. Let's look at tenant resolution. So how does when you send out a link to your customers, they will connect to the service, and somehow NAV needs to figure out what tenant to give, or what tenant to give data from, right? For the web client, these 2 links up here are giving you exactly the same tenant. So you have a host name, and this is actually the one that is put in the email. HTTPS techdays2 navdemo.net nav web client. Click this one, and you will open the web client, and I can log in and stuff like that, and you'll get the right one. You will see up here that actually the URL changed when I typed it, and I'm going to talk about why in a second. You can also specify the tenant in the query parameter. Clicking this link will give us exactly the same, and you'll see here that I'm actually connected to a different server now. So I'll go in here and say admin my password. I'm going to take the other browser and say admin and my password. If you look in the URL up here, this guy was redirected to port 44304, which is machine number 4 in our cloud service. This one is redirected to 44303, which is machine number 3. But they are, of course, connected to the same database. So if I go into customer here, let's go into items and change one of the items, bicycle demo. Close this one. Then the other guy should, in a second, let's see. Okay, yeah, I can't even see what's what. The other guy will have the bicycle demo as well. Oh, this was a bad demo. But anyway, now you'll see the bicycle demo on both tabs here, right? It's like they are so identical because it is the same thing. You can only see in the URL that you actually got 2 different servers here. But of course, the data are updated behind the scenes. So how does it happen? I mean, how does this one know that you want data from TechDays 2 tenant, and what is the NAV TechDays navdemo.net, and what is this? Well, this is actually the server name. The server and the service is called NAV TechDays.navdemo.net. That is a specific name of a server or of a cloud service. And the right way to specify a tenant is by putting a query parameter $tenant equals TechDays 2. NAV has, however, whenever you mount tenants, the ability to specify what's called alternate tenant IDs. And alternate tenant IDs can be other ways of identifying a tenant. And that could be a host name. So my tenant, TechDays 2, is actually mounted with TechDays2.navdemo.net as an alternate ID, meaning that if somebody connects to that URL, I'm going to say, well, I can see that matches the alternate ID of my tenant, so I'm going to give him that tenant. The same thing can be done with the SharePoint app. If you install a SharePoint app, then we can use the SharePoint host URL, like the site that you installed the app on, to specify what tenant you actually get the data from in NAV, meaning that you don't have to have $tenant equals something. It's actually done by simple URL rewriting in, and that's an IIS feature. So we actually, whenever you do the hostname here, we take the techdays.navdemo.net and put as $tenant equals techdays2.navdemo.net. And if we take a look in the browser here and take a look at what happens here, it says tenant limit techdays2. That's the one where I typed that. And let's take the other tab. It says tenant equals techdays2.navdemo.net, ending up in the same area. Let's have a look at the server to see how that actually plays out and see if we can look at whatever TechDays tenant we had up here. TechDays 2. Where are we? Here we are. Tenant ID, TechDays 2. Alternate tenant IDs, you can have multiple, is techdays2.navdemo.net. And I have installations where I have like a gazillion of different alternate IDs because I have the same app installed on a number of different SharePoint sites that points to the same tenant in NAV, and that's the way to do these things. Looking at, not this one, the Windows client. If you're running click once, select server dialog is not available. You'll always get the tenant for which you got the click once manifest, and in my case, http techdays2.navdemo.net. If I click this one, I will get the click once manifest for TechDays 2. If I go up here and select TechDays 200, I will get the click once manifest that connects me to TechDays 200, meaning that in this one, when I get a client installed, I will have a custom setting config pointing to a different tenant than if I install this one from the other one. And if I press install here, it's actually going to install a new one, because even though I already had installed the one for TechDays 2, I have not installed the one for TechDays 200. and I need to install the click once manifest for this one if I want to connect to that one. I don't want to do that right now. If you installed NAV, select server dialog. I already showed you that that's the server name and the port, and then /tenant here. On Dynamics nav // it's a query parameter like all other URLs. So wherever it's a URL, it's actually a query parameter. I thought that Dynamics nav also supported the host name in here. I found out yesterday it doesn't, so I'll file a bug on that because it was intended to be Dynamics nav // then TechDays2 navdemo.net, the port, the instance, and the company, and that would be able to give you the right tenant. It doesn't in 2013 R2, I think it's a bug. Web services supports the same thing. So with a query parameter, you can specify server name and your tenant as a query parameter, or simply by adding this one, which is your host name. Clicking this one will give me the internet site, blah, blah. Also, I don't know what that is, but that's probably because the URL is wrong. Let me take the email again, because this URL is definitely right, and you can see that is HTTPS TechDays2 and 78, and the other one, web services, is also just TechDays2, and I get just one of the servers. I cannot see here which server I got because it's just running through the load balancer, and it's seamless to me which server I got my response from. Okay. But again, you can specify the query parameter, or you can specify just the host name. When you type in a username and a password, that is a very common mistake by users using web services and a multi-tenant solution. You need to specify tenant / in the username like you do with a domain username in AD. Because when we do authentication, we actually cannot see what is on the query beforehand, so we need to know what tenant to authenticate you against. The user table is in the tenant database, so we're kind of out of luck if we don't get the tenant information. If you don't specify this, you will get an error. Considerations to take when creating a multi-tenant solution, like a solution that you want to host on the cloud for people to get access to by themselves. Simplification, I selected that as the first line. It needs to be that simple. If people get access to a solution which is complicated and they need 6 days of training, chances are you'll never know, because they tried this out and they found it too complicated, and then they're not going to call you for 6 days of training. They're just going to go on and find another solution that can help them. Self-service. This is kind of targeted for, like, if you want to do these solutions for a lot of customers again, you won't be able to answer questions. You won't be able to do the training. You need to create a solution where they can learn by doing. I think the mini app in 2013 R2 shows this very well by showing you videos of how to do things in various areas. And one of our partners, Serenic in the US, they also created what's called a slimmed down version of the Serenic Navigator. It's called Serenic Navigator Express. And that one is like a very, very, very simple version of Serenic Navigator. And everywhere you have like how-to videos of how to do this and how to do that. And it should be like whenever their customers, which are not-for-profit organizations in the US, going in and they will provide the click, try, buy, and they'll get a tenant and they can try this out, and they must be able to figure out how to use the system without calling Serenic. And that's what they're targeting, at least. They'll go live with a system like this in a couple of weeks, I think. Self-service, it's a good idea to have demo data included if people do a try, and then use rapid start whenever they do a buy in order to help them like get their static data in and stuff like that. The app needs to be configurable, like reports. You need to be able to configure what logo and stuff like that. You cannot rely object metadata changes anymore. You cannot rely on page changes. You need to create an application where customers themselves, through configuration or whatever, can change the app into looking like the app they want to run. App database versus tenant database, there's a number of things that are in the app database, and typically tenants will not be able to write in the app database. You can, when you mount tenants, specify that tenants are allowed to write in the app database in a running hosted service in the cloud. That is highly not recommended, because people can now change things for the other guy, which, like, I can go in and remove something from the web services table for another customer, and his solution is probably suddenly down, right? And there's a few AL commands affected. If you look at the different databases, the databases that are in the application database, as I said, will be read-only whenever you run a multi-tenant solution. And the places where this probably hurts the most is, I think, profile, web services for some piece, charts, and I think permission sets. These are the things that, well, we might end up taking these tables and splitting them into two different ones so that the tenant can override information in these tables for that tenant. But we cannot give them access to override it for everybody, right? And we didn't do that in R2, and we might be changing some of these things in the future versions. But I mean, stuff like web services, right? It is part of your application definition to have these things published as web services. But it's also part of that tenant who needs to maybe do Excel import from a specific OData feed that goes to a different table. So he wants to have this thing exposed as a web service, but the app needs these things. So we might, right now, it's only in the app, and you need to do that. And the way that you are informed about this, now connected to a normal tenant, so I'll connect to web services. I can, of course, read the data as everybody else. I can, of course, create a new one, because I haven't written anything to the database yet. So whatever. The time I click publish, it actually creates the record in the database, and I will get an error saying this page has an error. And if I look at this one, you do not have permission to insert web service records because the tenant is mounted with the application database as read-only. Contact your system administrator. And we don't want to do that because I don't want to change it. Some of the other things, like the web services one is a good one. If you have application code, I know I wrote application code at some point in time which auto-exposed things as web services when you said edit in Excel on a page. Then I said, okay, and we need to expose this page as a web service. That code would not be able to run in a multi-tenant solution. So we need to find out a different way to do that. Also, if you have code accessing some of the other things here while while connected to a tenant, you will also get errors there. A couple of AL commands that are affected. Tenant ID is a new one that returns the ID of the currently executing tenant. Application path, well, that has nothing to do with tenants at all, but it will return the path on the currently executing server. And as you knew, I mean, as long as you're running a Windows client, you will have a sticky connection to a server, but if you're running web services, you will not. So if you imagine that somewhere in your app code on a page, you create a temporary file in the application path, chances is that next time that page is going to be accessed by somebody, it can be a different tenant, it can be a different user, it can be a different server. Do not use the file system on the server for anything. If you do that, there's time to refactor that if you want to run a multi-tenant solution. Get URL is a new command. As you can imagine, I showed you the URLs for the web client, the Windows client, and you got the function called tenant ID, and you can imagine that if you wanted to create a URL that returns a pointer to an OData feed to this page and this data. You could do that by doing simple string manipulations. But there's a lot more to that than there. If we look at getURL, it is a function where you specify what client type do you want to get the URL for, what is the company name, what object type, what object ID, and what is the record. And then I'll get a URL that matches this tenant. I cannot specify the tenant ID here. It's always going to give me the tenant that I'm connected to, because it doesn't make sense to give me a pointer to a different tenant. If you're running single tenancy, it's exactly the same. It relies on 3 settings in the custom settings.config, where you need to set up the base URLs for this server, because we cannot use the machine name. I've seen code that just takes the machine name and adds some other things, and then you have a URL. But if you're running multiple computers in a cloud service, then that's also not possible, because the machine name is just whatever, and that's behind the cloud service. And what you really need to specify is the server, the cloud service URL, right? And that's what you type into your custom settings.config. Let's look at some of these things. Here we have this one. That was not the one I wanted. Oh, yeah, here. So let's look at the OData thing here. OData base URL is here. And that specifies NAV TechDays.navdemo.net and the port and NAV OData. So that's my base URL. This information is used whenever getURL is creating a URL for data in this on this app. The same in the SOAP services. This URL is used for that. And let's look at client services. Web client base URL has HTTPS and no port, but the same server and all of these things. So with these 3 base URLs, I am able to create URLs for the different services. And I created a small 2 fields on the customer card, which returns me a couple of URLs. So I'll open the customer card here for the Canon group in my tenant, and I'll have a client URL here. And if I hover over that one, or take this one and copy that, I'll close this one, paste it. I'll see that in the beginning of that, it gives me techdays2.navdemo.net. That's actually my alternate tenant ID. That's nice, because it's not what were in the base URL. So it replaced my server name with my host name, which is what I wanted to do. And then nav web client, my company, page, and the bookmark for the customer. So it gives me out the best possible URL that accesses the data that I want to. On the OData feed, the same thing. It actually utilizes the fact that it knows that I have alternate tenant resolution set on with the hostname base. So it says techdays2 navdemo.net, and then company something, customer card, and then give me a specific customer. Pressing OK to this one will actually give me the OData feed to this specific customer. I'll show you the code behind those 2 in a second. They're just one-liners. Let's try to connect to a different tenant. And what I want to is I want to try to connect to HTTPS, NAV TechDays, and connect to tenant TechDays 4. The reason for that is that TechDays 4 does not have an alternate or a host name. So it only has this one. So if I go to customers in this one, and say this customer, then you'll see that this one actually, let's just take this one, is different. It gave me the server name here, the port, the company, the customer card, and then question mark tenant equals TechDays 4. So you don't have to worry, you don't have to create URLs. You can replace the code wherever you have done stuff like creating URLs in your code with the call to get URL. It supports 4 different clients, web, Windows, OData, and SOAP. And then there are 2 special ones called current and default. Default is specified in the config file, which is the default client type on your computer, so if you want to return that. Always, if users are typically using the web client, you can say client type default. If users are using the Windows, you set the default to that. The client type current is, of course, the current running client. So if you are using the web client to do reports and you want to drill into the web client, you use current, and then web client will return a web client URL, and Windows client will return a Windows client URL. Yeah, let's have a look. We already did that. Let's just have a very short look at the code behind this. F9, and on after get current record, there should be 2 lines. The OData URL is get URL client type OData, company name object type page 21, and my current record, and that is what gives me the URL for OData, and client URL is the same, just with client type web. Okay. Oops. Back to this one. So changes to the way the developer works. Well, not a lot. I've showed you 3 things that changed in the AL language. Get URL is actually not only for multi-tenancy. It's just a better way of creating URLs instead of the way that we used to do it. And it's, of course, changed in the app where it was used before to create URLs. There are a couple of changes in the development environment. As Michael told you yesterday, the development environment, whenever we want to do database changes, we need to connect to a service tier to actually do these database changes. And let's see, I have time, so I'll do some fun stuff here. I'm going to go in and do some actual changes to the NAV TechDays service. So that is the one that we are running here, and I'm running on a tenant. I just showed you that I couldn't change anything here, but I'm going to now go in while I'm running this one and create a field and add that field to a page and see that it pops up here. And the place where I'm going to do the modification, as I talked about earlier, I have this in my cloud service, NAV TechDays. I created what's called a dev box in one of the instances. And the reason for that is that my SQL server is only available from inside my virtual network on the cloud. I cannot connect to the SQL server from this machine. And I couldn't, and if I could, it would be very slow because doing object modification over the WAN is not very efficient. So I just created a small box inside the cloud service here, which is, if I look at that, does not have any endpoints. It doesn't participate in any of the load balancing, anything like that. It just has a remote desktop endpoint, and I can connect to that, and that is my dev box. If I shut it down, I'm not paying anything but for the 100 megabytes of storage, which is like $0.01 a year or something like that. So it's like virtually free for me to have a dev box inside my my cloud service. And it's very, very convenient because when I do that, my TechDays dev machine here, I have my role-teller client, I have my development environment, PowerShell, all of these things, and I have a service tier running on this one as well. So I don't connect to one of the 4 load balance service tiers. I actually do everything on this box, and I have set up a special tenant for me, which is a system tenant. So if I start the role-teller client here, it's going to connect to my system tenant, so I'm not actually modifying any of my customers' data if I were to do any tests. I'm just looking at my default tenant, which is none of the other ones. As you saw, I was running Windows authentication. Well, this service tier on the dev box is set up for Windows authentication, and the service tier actually does not have all the other tenants. So all the 750 tenants are not loaded on this service tier. Why should they? This is just a dev box. Meaning that it's business as usual if I want to do development, but of course knowing the impact of what I do, right? So let's have a look at some of these things. I haven't tried this too many times before, but let's just see if I actually can design the customer page and add a field in this one. So let's go down and add a field called my test, text 250. So as Michael and Thomas told you yesterday, when I save this table, then it's going to check whether these table definitions are like ruining anything in any of the, or in this tenant, but it's not going to connect to all the other tenants. So I say yes to that one. The database is required with several NAV server instances. You must choose an instance, and that is, I'm going to choose just the one that is on my box here, which is which one? This one. I could connect to the other ones and let those do the modification to the app database, but I'm not. Select that one, and now it has saved my table definition. The other tenants right now does not know about this field. Maybe the tenant that I'm logged into right now will see this change because I have the customer database open, but on demand they will figure out that there's a change and actually add that. I'll add the field to the page before let's just add it to the list first. Let's say here, F3. Here we are. Yep, and save that one. So now I created the field and added that to the customer list. If I run this client, go to customers, it should pick it up immediately, of course, because I used this service to actually do the inserts of the field and stuff like that. If I close this one and connect to, now I'm one of my customers, and I click the customers, then this one should be updated as well. As you can see, there's a field now called my test. So I can modify, even though there's 750 tenants and there might be maybe 50 of those guys using this system right now, I can still add fields, and the tenant databases will be updated on demand. If I go into my SQL Management Studio and try to look at the databases for all the inactive tenants will not be updated yet. It's only the ones where a user actually is connected and doing stuff. Let's do a couple of more modifications and then in the end tear down my tenant. I'll do something that I'm not allowed to do and then show you what happens. And then I cannot connect to my tenant anymore before I fix that problem. So I'm also going to show you what you should not do. So I did this. I created creating a field and adding it somewhere is more or less harmless, right? Then I'll go to the customer card and add the field here as well. Here we are. Save. Back to my customer here. Maybe it's already there. Yes, my test. And now I'll type data in here. So one of my tenants actually modified this and added data in this one. That's nice. I found out that there was a field and that's very convenient for me. But now the problem is if I want to delete this field again from my development experience, then there's a tenant here which is not able to delete the field unless I specifically tell the tenant that it can do destructive field or table changes, right? Going to my dev machine and cleaning up after my test. I was not supposed to do this on a running environment. My manager just told me that you screwed up, Freddy. So I need to clean up my mess before anybody figures out. But as you know, one of the customers already entered data in this field. And even though I was very fast, I'll say delete line, save. And now I think everything is fine. That's good. I'm good. I'm not going to get fired now because this tenant, like click customers. Oh, one or more invalid column. Well, that's fine. It's just because of the object metadata cache, it's gone. Like I cleaned up, I can go into the page and the field is gone here as well, and I think everything is good. The problem is that one of the tenants actually already used the field, and that's this guy, right? A server error has occurred and the content cannot be displayed. Refresh the page, that's fine. And I am dead in the water. The reason for this is that all 4 servers are mounting the tenants with, and that is the obvious choice, do not delete or do not do data destructive changes to the tenant schema. What I just did was I removed a field that had data, meaning that this tenant is now out of lock. So tenant 2 is now dead. I should be able to connect to the other tenants still, because those tenants did not have, like say, NAV TechDays 4 tenant. This tenant did not put any data into the customer, the new field, so the field was just deleted from this tenant. But I have a dead tenant now, TechDays 2 tenant. I need to go in and actually do a mount NAV tenant on one of the servers. With that one, with the mode sync, there's a sync mode telling it to do destructive changes or remove the field manually from with SQL Management Studio and mount the tenant again. Actually, that's not going to work. I need to do the mount nav tenant with the right mode. Okay, so now I just destroyed my demo tenant. Whenever you want to, you have a cloud service with a number of customers on, and you want to upgrade that service from a version 1 to a version 2. How do you do that? I mean, if you have 10,000 customers, chances are you don't want to do this, where you take all customers and upgrade into the next version. It kind of depends on how big that change is, right? Again, if we're looking at Office 365, they upgrade all customers at the same time. Depends on, is it just bug fixes and stuff like that, or did you actually put in a lot of new functionality, which you might want to test out with a few customers before getting everybody up on the new version. If you want to take the entire NAV cloud service and actually get that to a new version, you need to inform the customers. You will tear down the cloud service, do full backup, perform the upgrade, restart the cloud service, and it's a lengthy process. The other one would be if you just want to upgrade a single tenant and then have the version 1 and the version 2 running at the same time. So you have 9,999 customers on version 1, and you'll move one to the new version, right? You'll create the new version of this one, talk to the specific customer that you want to run as a beta on the version 2, dismount him over here and take a backup of the database, and then mount him on version 2. Mounting him on that version will run all the scripts that Thomas showed you yesterday and do upgrades and stuff like that. And then you'll just update the DNS so that the URL that you gave that customer will now point to the version 2 instead of NAV TechDays. It's going to point to NAV TechDays version 2.navdemo.net, and the next time he runs the Click Once client, he's going to get an upgraded Click Once client. The next time he runs the web client, he's going to connect to a new service and see all his data with the updated version of the app. When you've done this with a number of tenants, you can of course take the tenants and move them at the same time, or move your app to the version 1 if you don't want to run 2 simultaneous versions of your app. So I have like 14 minutes still for questions. And I think I got some t-shirts here for the people with the most, or maybe just do it with the 5 first guys to raise their hand, I think, down here. Question?
We can have several databases on one SQL server, but can we have several SQL servers? Can we run several SQL servers?
Question is whether we can have several SQL servers. Yes, you can. The app database can be in one, and the tenant databases can be in different locations, of course, or different SQL servers. So there is a database name in the tenants config file. I actually didn't show you that one, but all the tenants configurations are in a tenants config that is next to the custom settings config, and there's a database name in that one as well. So you can have multiple databases and for a database for every tenant if you want to do that, but probably not relevant. Yep.
It's about the security. When, if you know the tenant ID or if you know the host name, when you arrived at the page, you just asked for the user ID and password.
Yep.
So if you, that's all that's between you and access to another tenant's data?
That is correct. If you have a username and a password to another tenant's data, then you have access to that, yes. But that is the same. If you have my username and password, you have access to my email, right?
Yeah, true. But usually if you're accessing a customer site, there's some firewall or some control of getting into their data center, as it were.
That is correct. If you're running an on-prem installation, that you will have firewalls and stuff like that. In the world where you are going towards if you're running a hosted service, you wouldn't have that. So, yeah. You'll get that one. Oh, sorry. I think there's a question up here. How do you deal with multiple country versions? Well, you'll have to run the same app, meaning that you'll have to put them into one.
So it's going to be on the same virtual or on the same...
You'll have to combine them, or you'll have to run multiple apps, meaning multiple services. Right? So if you cannot combine the things, the country modifications, and then use configuration to run the right one for the right users, then you'll have to run two different services for those two countries.
Okay. For example, you have a company which handles thousands of items with lot numbers, so tracking specification. And so all the departments are creating entries in the reservation entry. So in 2009, you will get blocks on this table. How will be the situation with a multi-tenancy system?
So that so every tenant will have their own reservation table. So for every tenant, you will have the same situation you had in 2009 for an installation. So you would have, you can easily have 100 tenants you doing this at the same time if they use their own tenant. But of course, if you have 100 users in one tenant doing that, you will run into logs exactly as in 2009. We did a lot of things in 2013 to avoid logs, and those will just benefit both in single tenant and multi-tenant environments.
So one solution can be that the departments will be split on separate tenants.
So the question is whether a solution could be that departments are separate and tenants. So that's one of the things that when I stated in the beginning what multi-tenancy was intended for, it can be used for that, but it was not intended for that, meaning that you'll get clear separation of the databases, meaning that you probably, if you have different departments running on that, you probably want to actually replicate data between those guys, but because you cannot have some tables shared between the tenants. They are totally separated. So you'll probably have more problems running multi-tenancy if you use that for multiple departments, then you'll get benefits from that. Sorry for if you came here because that was your problem. It's one of the guys, I mean, afterwards I'm going to ask again how many people are going to think they have an immediate need for multi-tenancy. And I think, because I've heard stuff like that before, and you can use multi-tenancy for some of these things, but I'm not sure that it is the right solution for these things. 2013 will solve a lot of the logging problems already. And that's maybe, 2013 R2 is the same, of course. Yep.
In the tenant database, there's a table called object metadata snapshot.
Yep.
What's the logic behind it?
So the object metadata snapshot, that's a good question. Object metadata snapshot is if you have let's take the customer table, right? So the object metadata for the customer table is in the app database. And it stays there's these 100 fields. And whenever I create a new field, I'm going to add that to the app database. Whenever the service here running a specific tenant is using that table, it's going to compare the object metadata snapshot to the one in the app database and know, I need to update something here. And if that's on a table, I need to actually update the schema on the table. That is how the field made it to the tenant database. And that is the reason why we don't do that on all tenant databases. Whenever we connect, we'll see the object metadata that was used to create the schema of this table was this, and there's a new one here, so we're going to update the schema in the tenant database and put the new snapshot in there. So that's the way we handle that one. There is no object tracking table. That would be... that is, well, I guess you're right on that. I guess the comparison is just between the tenant databases and the... But I'm thinking what happens with the single tenancy thing then. I'll have to say I don't know what happens there. If you have multiple servers running single tenancy, we'll have some kind of tracking. I don't know how that's going to fly. Other questions? In the middle here.
I have a question about the license model. How is this done in multi-tenancy?
So I'm not a license expert. Probably, I could try to babble a lot of stuff off here, and I'd probably be wrong in most of the things. If you have licensing questions, I think I'll just ask you guys to send me an email, freddyk@microsoft.com, and I'll forward that to the people who can answer you rightfully and truthfully instead of me trying to say what I know and what not. Sorry for that.
Hello. In NAV 2013, we can debug only one session in one instance. So how is it going to be in multi-tenancy?
What do you mean about one session in one instance?
So we can debug only one session in per instance, one NAV instance.
Oh, debugging.
Yeah.
I know you can debug. I think it's the same. It's just one. I mean,
Per tenant
the question is, I think you can only debug one instance per service tier.
Okay, so if we have multiple tenants under one instance, so we can debug only one session.
Yes, and if you have multiple servers that I showed you, you can do. You'll have a hard time figuring out what server he's running on and all of these things. So I don't think multi-tenancy and a lot of servers and thousands of users are really targeted at live debugging of stuff. I think that's something you'd have to do on a trial system and see if you can replicate the error that's coming there.
Okay, and debugger breakpoint table is also in app database. So can't we set individual breakpoints per tenant?
Well, it's in the app database. That's probably right. But so it's only going to be. You need to start it in. You need to be running in the debugging mode, right? And you need to be connected with the debugger. So no, you cannot set that on a tenant-specific thing.
Okay, thank you.
Just to say that on a production
So as David said, you probably won't do debugging, but you might do profiling, which is supported. And then you can try to find your bug there and fix it, doing tracing. Thanks, David. Is there another question up there behind you?
Yeah, there is. One question, do we have or will we have a possibility to get data from one tenant to another, like change company in the classic environment?
Well, you can write some SQL scripts that does it, but it's not like we don't have any AL code or anything that can do that. You won't be able to do that without using other means of that. So, I would probably ask why do you want to do that?
For example, I got a company who just drives 2 tenants.
You have a company who runs 2 tenants. Again, that's one of the situations where this was not intended for that purpose. It might be able to use it for that purpose, but you'll have to go over and about to make that work. And the question is that the right approach, or would it be better to find a different approach to use than multi-tenancy? I think we have one more question here, or there's a couple more here. I don't know what time it is.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have a possibility to indicate on a table whether this table is on which server this table resides? It could be on the app server or on the local tenancy server. For example, currencies or countries or any master data, it would be easy if a new country occurs, then as a service to our customers, we could add just this one country. And
so I think they thought about, we had that option for multiple companies, right? Whether this is in the company tables or, I don't know why they selected not to do that, but I think it was a deliberate decision not to do that. Whether that's something we'll add later, I don't know. But for now, it's clear separation. And what the app database is a definition of the application with the, not with master data, but with everything that is application specific. And the tenant database, everything that is data specific. So there's a very, very clear separation. If we start to put some data into the app database, we start to get we might get into problems for, again, if we look at what is the primary purpose of multi-tenancy. But you're probably pointing at a scenario where you want to use multi-tenancy again for something that is maybe a number of hospitals in a hospital chain or whatever, right? And it was not intended for that purpose. So I think there was a question right here.
I like to know that where is the shared .NET space server side in relation to multi-tenancy? Is it on a physical machine? Is it in the tenant space? Or it's like shared for all the tenants?
Shared?
For example, if we define a variable server side and it's a shared variable, we had an idea to use some .NET variables like the single instance code unit, like you fill them and you can access them all over the software after that point, and the value don't change, it will be shared. Now what happens to those?
I don't know. I would be inclined to say that they would be tenant specific, but I don't know. Take that question, send it to me in an email. I'll ask the right people and you'll get a response on that one.
Sure.
Sorry about that, I think down here. Yep.
Is there a simple solution for a tenant who wants to come out of the multi-tenancy scenario? So they've been running on the multi-tenant, but they decide they want to have their own on-premise or...
Take it back out of your database and then go on-prem.
The second part of that being that you've got the app database which has the objects on, or
Well,
are
of
they
course
actually copied onto
Not,
the tenant database?
so you'll have to have a backup of the app and the tenant
Sure.
database, of course. If you cannot, as a customer, what you own, if you're running towards a multi-tenant solution, you own your data. And you can always, I mean, legal-wise, you can always get a copy of your data. You cannot get a copy of the app because that's owned by the partner. But if the partner supports that you will go on-prem with that app and that data, he can do that for you. But you cannot, I mean, you can't get a copy of the app if you haven't purchased it, because if you're running towards a cloud service, you'll probably have a different licensing model than if you purchased the app, right? So you'll have to do something about that. But you'll always be able to get a copy of your tenant data, and then you'll have to figure out whether you can get the app. I mean, if you're running towards W1, which you're probably not, then you can just get that from NAV, but else you'll have to figure out how. One more question, Arndt?
Freddy, you showed the high availability on the Azure machines for the NAV service tier. How about the SQL part and a high availability? Is that fully available?
So I deliberately skipped the SQL part, because if you go in a browser, your favorite search machine, and write SQL high availability, Windows, Azure, infrastructure services, then you will find all the information you need in order to do that for SQL Server.
But then you'll find information about SQL Azure. But now we are using SQL on VMs on Azure.
Yes, that's why you have to write SQL infrastructure as a service. Yes. But yeah, you're right. SQL Azure, we don't support SQL Azure in NAV 2013 R2. We support only SQL on infrastructure as a service. And there is information out there to set that up as HADR, high availability disaster recovery, and all of these things as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, one last question from me. How many people do now think they have an immediate need of multi-tenancy? By the raise of hands. There's way fewer than before, and I think you guys know what you're talking about now, and I think that you're right on that. And feel free to contact me on my email if I can help you figure out some of the darker areas of this still, and you have some questions more that you pop into your mind after this session.